welcome back. Today we look at how to build an interactive part of your web page. So far you've built web pages and they're pretty nice. We used HTML to decide how what things mean, and then some CSS to start talking about how they look, and that's pretty exciting. But now we're going to make the jump from simply creating static pages to building pages that can actually do something. And this is really important because the people who can do this, well, they can have a lot more fun on the web. One thing we can do is, well, make games, and games are interactive by definition, so we really need to be able to get some sort of interactivity from the user. We'll begin with a very standard kind of interactivity. We want to be able to ask the user a question, let them type some information in, and then we're going to be able to do something with that information. So as you look at today's example, well, it doesn't do that yet, but it gets us closer. It at least shows us how to build the form. So we're going to start by learning how to build a form, and then over the next couple of videos, we'll talk about how to get it to do what it is we want it to do. So we begin with input.html, and it looks about right. And you look at it, you see it has, well, a box. Okay, that's kind of neat. And then it says, please type your name. That looks like ordinary text. Then there's a place I can type a name, Andy. And there's even a submit button. And look, I can type in that text box. That's cool. And also that button, when I hover over it, it looks clickable. It looks buttonish. And I can click it, and it looks like it gets depressed, but that's okay. You can feel better. So it looks like it gets depressed, but it doesn't do anything. Well, that's all right. That's exactly what I've designed. Right now, I've simply created a web page that gives me the user interface I'm going to need, and soon we'll add some programming to it to make it do something interesting. You okay? You okay? All right. So now you can use the Control-U, Command-U, whatever on your browser to take a look at the source code, which I have conveniently placed in front of you. And you can see that the code here is a little bit new, nothing too scary, but there are a few elements inside the body. The first thing that you'll notice is a form/form pair. What this means is, I'm building a form. A piece of my web page here is going to be interactive. There's a piece of this that the user will be able to put input into. It's not 100% necessary, but it's still a pretty good idea. So we typically use the form/form pair to indicate that a piece of our page will be taking input. Now the form is an important thing, but it doesn't really have any visual feel, and it also still needs to have another container in it officially. So in order to make that work, what we're going to do is we're going to put another element inside called a field set. The field set is the typical element that you use to contain all of your input elements, all your form elements. There's other things you can use, but a field set is nice. One thing is that it does give us that nice little rectangle box, so I guess that's a good thing. So we have the form/form pair. Inside that, we have the field set/field set pair. Inside that, we have a couple of other tags. Here, make it look a little prettier. We have a label, we have an input, and we have a button. There's the label, there's the input, there's the button. Oh, okay, so it all corresponds. So a label, what's a label? Well, a label simply is some text in a form. You don't absolutely have to have this, but it turns out to be a useful thing. And there's a few reasons for that. One, well, it really is a label, and in HTML we like to describe what things mean. So if the purpose of this text is to be a label, well, that's handy. Secondly, we may want to do some formatting. So if we do want all of our labels to have a certain size and font and background color and whatever, and we will want that, then it's nice to have all of those things listed as labels. And so that's a really good thing to do. Finally, sometimes it's nice to know what text element a label is associated with. So in this particular case, this label is associated with that text box, and so it's nice to have that relationship marked. For certain other kinds of input that we won't be doing today, that's really useful. For radio buttons and checkboxes and so on in particular, that's a very, very handy thing. It's still a nice thing to do because we're describing how our information all fits together. All right, so let's take a look at this. The label / label is very simple, and inside you simply put the text that you want to appear in your label. And it's interesting, it doesn't look any different now, but I could make it look different. All right, now the other attribute of label, or the only attribute of label we're ever concerned with, is this for equal text name. What we're saying is, if you care, please associate this label with the txt name element that we're about to produce. It's just a politeness. It's not 100% necessary, but it's useful. So the for attribute allows you to connect a label to its corresponding input element. Okay, that's fine. Now let's take a look at the input element. Now the input is interesting because it doesn't have a / input. Well, the input isn't technically considered a container like so many of the other elements. So in order to make that clear, it doesn't have a / input. But I want to help myself remember that it's a single element. I didn't just forget the / input. It didn't belong there. And so many developers will use just a / at the end to say, hey, I know there's no / input. It's cool. This was required in a previous version of HTML called XHTML. It's not required anymore, but I still use it, and a lot of developers do. Help myself remember. I didn't just forget the / input. I just didn't need it. Okay, inside the input, there's a couple of attributes. One is type, and one is ID. Input type is text, means, hey, this is going to be a text box. I'm going to type stuff in. There are some other types, password, radio button, checkbox. We're not going to worry about those in this example, in fact, in this class, because they're not really that relevant to game programming. The text type is so flexible and so easy to use that we'll be able to do it for the kinds of input we'll need. You know, what's the name of your hero, and so on. So we won't do the other ones here. If you are interested, I have other books and courses that do cover that information. All right. So our input type is text. That's great. The other attribute is ID. And the ID means, hey, I get to name this. I get to give this element a name. Names are important because we use them when we're talking about particular objects on the screen. So if I'm going to be writing code about something, then I need a unique ID so I'll know what thing it is I'm talking about. You follow? Yeah. So anytime we create an element that we're going to be coding with, we'll typically add an ID to it. And so ID is text name simply says, well, this is an input element and its ID is going to be text name. Okay, why txt name? So I can remember it's a text box corresponding to the name. Okay, fine. So there's the input. Finally, we have the button element. Now, a button is, well, the button. Different operating systems may make it look a little bit different, but we're not going to worry about that. Of course, we can use CSS to make it look exactly how we want. So the button, it says submit, which is just what a lot of form buttons say. And it doesn't do much yet. We will add something to it in just a moment. So button type equals button, submit, /button. Whoa, button type is button /button? That must have been named by the Department of Redundancy Department. It seems really unnecessary to specify that a button's type is button. Well, just like the input, there's more than one kind of button. And surprisingly enough, the default type of button is not the button. Yeah, I know. I don't come up with these things. The main types of button, there's 3 kinds of button that you'll run across typically. You'll run across either this client-side button, which is the kind that we're doing right now. And that is, hey, this is a button that we're going to be responding to with some JavaScript code. Another kind of button, which is formally called a submit button, is a little bit different. What that does is it sends information over to another program on a web server. Oh, very fancy. That's a cool thing. I love doing it. We're not going to do it in this class. We don't care. So don't worry about that. We won't use that submit type of button. Another one is called a reset button, and what that does is it resets all of the elements to their default state. We're not going to use that one either. The problem is if I just say button /button, it'll make a submit button, which will not do what you want for this class. So for our purposes, We're interested in the standard button type button, so you have to specify button type equals button. If you don't, you'll get some weird behavior. It'll say it'll not act the way you want. What'll happen is your page will appear to refresh. So if that happens to you, check your button type, make sure you've specified it's button. Okay, so we've got the button type as button, we've got the submit, we close everything off. We close our field set, we close our form, we close our body, and there you go, you see it all there. Now, it doesn't work yet, but it does look pretty much like what we're trying to do. Come back in the next unit, and we'll talk about how to make it do what we want it to do. How do we read stuff from this? How do we respond to the button? Sound like fun? Oh, it is. I'll see you then.